let's bring in Republican Congressman Will Hurd of Texas. He's a member of the House Intelligence Committee as well as the Homeland Security and Oversight Committee's a former undercover CIA officer. Congressman, thanks for joining us.
Wolf, always a pleasure to be on.
So in these joint remarks with the South Korean president, President Trump said that U.S. patience with the North Korean regime is over. He used that word, over. What do you think he means by that? More sanctions, possible military actions? What options does the United States really have?
Well, I think the president was trying to say all options are on the table and that we're living in a new world, and I think that's the correct move. I think the Treasury sanctions against the Chinese bank yesterday is also the right move. As the previous panel was talking, with 90% of the North Korean economy dependent upon China, the fact that their nuclear weapons program is using loopholes in the Chinese tax and business code, being able to put that continued pressure on China is important. And the Chinese need to realize that the strategic interests of the U.S. and China is actually aligned when it comes to North Korea. And I think also the North Koreans need to realize that maybe their only way out of this is to engage with the South Koreans. We know the South Korean president is willing to have talks with North Korea. I think this may be an opportunity for the North Koreans to realize that they can potentially save face this way. But I think the president has made it very clear that all options are on the table. We see the response in Syria after the chemical weapons attack, saying that if you did this again in Syria, we will respond. I think the president and his team has proven that they're willing to act.
We heard the phrase burden sharing from President Trump in his remarks with the visiting South Korean president today. It seemed like a bit of a jab at a key U.S. ally. What do you think South Korea should be doing to halt a threat from North Korea?
Well, I haven't seen, I've just seen a readout of those remarks, and I wouldn't say that burden sharing is a jab at anyone. I think this is a shared problem. North Korea is a shared problem between us, South Korea, and also Japan. Our treaties outline this. Earlier in the year, General Mattis and Secretary Tillerson had been out to the region to reaffirm our commitment to those two allies. And the burden of dealing with a potentially nuclear-armed North Korea is a burden shared by all of us, and I would include China in that. And China needs to recognize that a nuclear North Korea is in nobody's interest. And having been out to the peninsula recently and realizing that the North Koreans with normal artillery could kill hundreds of thousands of people in Seoul, that they could likely already hit our allies like Japan or even possibly get to Guam. And we know that Kim Jong-un, the dictator in North Korea, is going to stop at nothing to keep a hold on that regime, and one of that is getting nuclear weapons. And so this is a difficult problem, but I think the United States, we need to stand tall when it comes to this threat, because if Kim Jong-un gets an ICBM and is willing to put a nuclear weapon on top of that, we got to be prepared for his use.
Very quickly on this, the whole notion of what's going on in Syria right now, clearly U.S. military action is escalating, designed at least in part to deal with the regime of Bashar al-Assad. Do you believe the president needs congressional authorization, military authorization for the use of military force right now before the U.S. escalates its military involvement, not only in Syria but elsewhere, Iraq, Afghanistan, given the nature of this war the U.S. is fighting?
I think having those conversations here in Congress are definitely important. When you look at the current AUMF that's been operating on since 9/11, deals with terrorism, and Bashar al-Assad, I think, is terrorizing his own people using chemical weapons. But I think this is something that we need to be clear. I believe Bashar al-Assad needs to go. We have a Syrian refugee problem because of him. He's been willing to use chemical weapons on his own people for dozens of occasions. I think he's a barbarian and has to go, and I think that would require Congress playing a role.
Very quickly, before I let you go, totally different subject. I'm anxious to get your reaction to the president's latest tweets going after the MSNBC anchor Mika Brzezinski. When you saw that tweet yesterday, you see the uproar that has developed over the past 24 hours, your reaction?
Well, it's beneath the stature of the president, and it's a distraction. We should be talking about our strategy on dealing with North Korea. We should be talking about our strategy on what happens, when post-ISIS losing Mosul. How do we prevent ISIS from metastasizing to northern Africa? We should be talking about what is our counter covert influence strategy to deal with the Russians' covert influence attempts in our elections and likely attempts in 2018. I think it takes away from that when we have this kind of conversation.
Yeah, the president's clearly not stopping tweeting on that subject. More tweets, so we're going to have a lot more on that coming up. Congressman Will Hurd, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you, Will. Have a good 4th.
You too. Thank you.